Hey everyone, welcome back to The Red Path. Dara here with you again today for another hobby video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to plan painting Angron, Primarch of the World Leaders. Grab yourselves a brew, got the video coming up next. Okay, welcome back everyone. So, as we all know, the World Leaders army set is imminent for release. We're looking at a couple of weeks time. We're going to have a whole bunch of fresh new kits in our hands to hobby and play around with. There's brilliant Berzerkers, 8-bounds, Jackals, all the good stuff coming out. But obviously, one release that's dominating everyone's kind of brain space, their excitement, is the release of Angron, our Demon Primarch. Now, the Angron model is really nice. I think Games Workshop have done a pretty good job translating the literature and the idea of Angron into a plastic sculpt that we can all have a lot of fun hobbying with. But I think one thing that I've kind of seen going around in various discussion groups, various forums and discords, etc., a lot of people are quite nervous about painting Angron, and I can understand why. For a lot of World Leader players, the bread and butter, the things that we're going to be used to, is painting power armored Marines. It's kind of, the standard thing that we're going to have in all our armies. It doesn't really matter what the unit type is at the end of the day, it's all power armor. And it's actually pretty rare that we're going to work in organics, in skin tones, in demon tones, unless you happen to have demons allied in with your army, which, to be fair, a bunch of people do. But Angron represents quite a difficult challenge to someone if all they've ever worked with is power armor. Not to mention the fact that the scale of the model is probably bigger than most things that any of us have actually painted before. The Primarch scale is quite a large centerpiece model. And that kind of comes together to be this daunting challenge for people where they're looking at this model and they're kind of saying to themselves, I'm not really sure how I'm going to approach this, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to tackle it, how I'm going to make it my own. And then you have to consider the fact that Angron, the model, is going to be the centerpiece for a lot of our armies. Being the Primarch of our Legion, he is going to dominate the battlefield both visually and hopefully in the rules, but that's another video. So I thought I'd put together this little video here today to talk about how you can kind of plan for this release, how you can start thinking about the ways that you're going to paint him, maybe some practice ideas that you can do, trying to have everything organized so that when you get the kit into your hands, you're not kind of looking at it saying, I have no idea what to do. You'll actually be able to start clipping things off, start putting it together, and maybe go into the project thinking, okay, I have at least a vague idea of what this is going to look like and what my workflow is going to be. So we're going to talk about that. That's coming up next. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do when you're facing down the barrel of a very big painting project like Angron or Berzerker or any other demon primarchs or models of similar scale, is you want to build up a bank of reference images. Now, I've spoken about this in other hobby videos, but this is actually really important for very large demon primarch models or the ilk, because a lot of the time we don't exactly know how to translate the ideas that we have onto the plastic. But there can often be good artwork or reference images out there which can kind of guide us and give us ideas and pointers, or maybe, show us an idea that we hadn't thought of already. Now, Angron, he doesn't have a particularly large image bank yet to dive into, at least in his demon form. But I expect that to change with the release of the codex. So one thing that I would say is keep an open mind for new images coming out when the codex releases. We've already seen a couple of new things coming out with, his new novel and a couple of images on the Warhammer Instagram page of new Angron kind of artwork and stuff. But there is one very iconic image of Angron from, I believe, 5th edition Apocalypse, which has this kind of it's the image that everyone recognizes as the keystone demon primarch Angron image, which, to be honest, obviously a lot of the inspiration for the current model has come from that image. It's kind of replicating that pose where he's holding the dead ultramarine. So looking at images like that gives you a pretty good understanding of how light and shadow is going to play on the model, and the types of colors that have already been selected by the artists for that's going to suit that kind of image. So from the images there's an awful lot of dark going on, deep shadows that kind of helps to make the red skin pop out and stuff like that. So it's really good to look for those kind of things and build up a bank of those images. Just spend some time looking at them and studying them and thinking, maybe I'll try and, replicate that onto the model itself. Another thing that you can do is you can have a look around on Instagram or on the Games Workshop site for models that are similar to Angron that have already been painted by people, so you can kind of get an idea of what they've done and if you might be able to translate some of those ideas onto Angron themselves. So a really obvious example for this is the likes of Scarbrands, regular Bloodthirsters, and Garath, Kabanda. If you look around and see what people are doing with those models, you can get inspiration yourself for what might look good on Angron, because at the end of the day, he is very similar to a Bloodthirster. So a lot of the things that work for a Bloodthirster are going to work for Angron as well. But don't limit yourself to just, Khorne demons or anything like that. Have a look through other ranges, have a look through artists that inspire you on Instagram, see what they're doing with similar kind of styles and things like that. Or branch out and look at completely different things, like, look at canvas art of demons and things like that to see if there's something that really grabs your attention. So building up a solid bank of reference images, things that are going to inspire you, is really, really important. Like when I began my Berzerker project, I had about 30 images of different things that I wanted to translate onto the Berzerker model, from either pictures of models or artwork or just things that I saw online that I was like, okay, cool, that's pretty inspirational. So once you have a bank of reference images, that's great. You've got this kind of folder that you can sort of build up a recipe initially for, and then as the project begins, constantly reference back to see if the ideas that you have are translating correctly onto the actual model. But another thing that's very, very important when you begin a project like this is picking the type of style that you want the project to be. Because there's nothing worse than starting a project and halfway through kind of changing your mind about the vision and either having to start everything again or continuing on and things not really matching from where they began with to where they finished with. So what I mean by that in terms of like styles and things like that, you've got your classic heavy metal style, you've got grimdark, you've got all these other types of what's that, slapchop, the one that's going around lately and everything. Like, how do you want your Angron to look? That will inform an awful lot of things when you combine that with your reference image bank. You'll be able to put those two things together and have a cohesive idea of how the project is going to go, and essentially the end results, the thing that you want to happen once you finish painting Angron, how you want this guy to look. Having that idea is very, very important, and it will inform a lot of the decisions that you make as you start painting him. Now, personally, you'll be unsurprised to know that I'll be going with a grimdark style for my Angron. And as talented as the heavy metal team are, I don't think that their paint job does justice to the model whatsoever, but we're going to get into that a little bit later in the video. I think a grimdark paint scheme is going to look fantastic on Angron, but that's just me. However you want to do it, that's your call. Just make sure that you kind of have an idea about the overall, we'll say, image of Angron on the model. Like, try and picture in your head how you want that model to look once it's perfectly finished to the best of your ability. It's also very important to set yourself a kind of a standard goal. So like, how good do you want this model to look? Like, obviously everyone wants Angron to look incredible, but you have to be realistic within your own kind of expectations and skill level as well. Like, if you think to yourself before you start the project, I want Angron to be a golden winning, entry level model, you have to put in the time and work and have the skill to make that happen. Otherwise, you might be quite disappointed with the result. So, being realistic with yourself about what you can expect at the end of the project is very important too. So once you have those three kind of concepts put together, you can start to move on to planning the paints and kind of how things are going to look as soon as you start putting paint on the model. It's going to be coming up next. Okay, so we've gotten to the point where we have a bank of reference images built up. We know the type of style and the concept that we're trying to execute with Angron. So we've gotten to the point where we need to start thinking about how we're actually going to sit down and paint this guy. Like, we have the concept, we have the idea. How are we going to translate that to the best of our ability onto this plastic miniature? So the first thing that we're going to need to look at is the type of textures and different kind of like material that's happening on this model. Now, a lot of people are very worried about Angron. They think he's going to be very complex to paint, but I have some good news. He's actually very, very simple. There's not a lot going on with this model, which is a really good thing because busy models are extremely complicated to pull off effectively when they're on like this scale, this size, this centerpiece kind of guy. Angron himself is quite simple. The main thing that we're looking at here is the flesh tone, red skin, that demonic hue. How are we going to pull that off, and what's the best way to do that? Following on from that is going to be the metallics, because there's an awful lot of metal pieces going on, be it his weapons, his armor, or like the kind of trim and barding all around the model. So how do we want that to look as well? Then it's going to be kind of like leathers and bones. They're the next things, which are fairly straightforward to do. And they're really the core elements of Angron. There's obviously lots of other little bits and pieces there, but they're the three main focal points. So you've got your kind of bone and leather, you've got your metallics, and you've got the red skin. Those are the things that you're going to want to focus on and put the most amount of time and effort into, namely the red skin. That is really important. If you can pull off a good skin tone, you're going to have a fantastic model, and the rest of the things are going to kind of fall into place almost naturally. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, red skin is actually very simple to do. You don't need an awful lot of paints going on with it. What I'm going to probably be doing is working up a couple of basic acrylic tones, maybe word bearers red mixed in with some browns and blacks, working up to a kind of like higher Mephiston red with maybe some wild red or highlights, stuff like that. And what we're going to do once all that's settled is we're going to start working in some oil blending. So I've got a video up on oil blending already, but oil blending is a fantastic way of adding shadow and tone to skin surfaces. I've done it on Macrolore, my demon prince already. He was sort of a test bed model for how I'm going to be painting Angron, and I think it came out really nice. You can add so much depth to the skin tone, really define the muscles if you start working in different oil blends. You can work with all sorts of different colors as well to give the effect of blood vessels going on under the skin. It's a really fantastic resource. And all the while we're going to be referencing back to our initial art pieces that we've built up, that reference bank that I was talking about, making sure that we're executing it in a way that's going to look satisfying and quite cool. But with those, that oil blending technique, we can really kind of establish some deep shadows to, if we want to try and recreate that original artwork, that's going to be the way to do it. Moving on from that is the metallics. So the really important part here with the metallics is striking a balance between the bronze and the steel, because obviously there's an awful lot of bronze armor on this guy. Now I know a lot of people are talking about like, oh, I might paint him white and blue. Don't do that. It's not going to be a good idea for the armor. Historically, Angron has never worn the white and blue of the Legion. It's always been the bronze. If you look at the 30k model, the 40k armor pattern takes a lot of, we'll say, ideas from that armor plate and brings them up to the demonic scale. So you really just want to kind of like use the 30k idea, that bronze gladiatorial armor, and try and translate that onto Angron. Now, working with large bronze armor surfaces is actually much more difficult than silver. There's a lot less weathering types that you can do on bronze, unless you want to start looking at vertiges and stuff like that. But you won't really be able to do rust or that much streaking grime. So what we're going to really be looking at here is making sure that we're building up deep shadows, working up to a very nice highlight, and trying to get a good understanding of where the light is going to be hitting those bronze parts. So it's going to be really important for the bronze armor is not overdoing it on the very bright paints, which is a very difficult thing to kind of rein yourself in on, but that's going to be key to actually selling a good effect there. Now the steel is a little bit more limited. A lot of what we're looking at is the weaponry, the chains. When I'm actually painting the model, his big sword, I know it's painted black in the artwork, I'm probably going to do that steel, because if we do that steel, we can do all sorts of gorgeous blood effects coming off over it. Not only that, the skulls running up the middle, we can have really cool OSL effects coming out of those, bouncing down onto the steel, which is going to show up a lot nicer than if we do the blade black. But you can do that blade black if you want to, that's no problem. And then moving on from that is leathers and bones, which are very simple, but because there's so many of them, they're going to be quite a spot color on the model that take your eye away from all that red and breaks it up, kind of makes it more interesting, things like that. So once we kind of have those core concepts down, we can focus on the little details. But when it comes to very big models like this, the more small details that you start to put in, the busier the model is going to start to get, and the harder it's going to be for our eye to focus on a single thing when we're looking at it. So Angron, simple model, keep the paint scheme simple as well, and you're going to have a really nice result. All the detail is going to be coming in the skin tones, how deep you're going to build up those shadows, how dark you're going to make those wing patterns, all that kind of stuff. Then you're going to have those gorgeous bronze armor points to like pop out and highlight everything. Just focus on executing that really well, and don't worry too much about trying to work interesting tiny details on these little skulls and stuff like that. That's all irrelevant. No one's going to be looking at, the fourth skull on his base and trying to see what you've done with that kind of a thing. Just try and execute the skin tones well, and you're golden. So next we're going to talk about a little bit about practice, what you can do to actually prep for Angron in terms of working on things on the table. It's coming up next. Alright, so we're pretty far along in the planning process now. We've got our reference images, we have our concept, we know the style that we're going for, and we've thought about how we're going to execute it. We've probably gathered up a bunch of paints that we think are going to be useful. Now, if you folks want, I can provide a list of the paints that I'm going to be using to paint Angron in the comment section of this video. Just let me know if you do. So we have all our paints together, and we know kind of the main focal points of this model that we're going to be putting a lot of effort into. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is thinking about those areas, those really important points, and looking at our own collection and seeing, is there something here that we can practice on to make sure that when we start on Angron, we're going to nail that look. Now, the very obvious thing is, if you have a Bloodthirster or spare parts from a Bloodthirster, use those for practice. They are perfect. They're literally like other parts of Angron. They're so similar to what he's going to be like that if you happen to have them in your collection, use them. If you're trying to pull off a cool new skin tone look with them, like the oil blending, like I'm saying, which I'm telling you folks, try it. It's going to look so good on Angron. If you haven't tried oil blending before, just prime the Bloodthirster's arm. You can even just spray it red, dry brush on a couple of red tones, and start working on some oil blending and just get an understanding of the technique. It's just one example, right? Another thing, the weapons. Try and find some big steel pieces like from Chaos Knights or from Age of Sigmar Demons or stuff like that, and start working on like your steel patterns, how you're going to build up. Like, are you going to go for a very dark steel with lots of like bright flecks? Or are you going to go for a very bright tone overall? And then you're going to look at the bronze armor. Like, again, the Bloodthirster is the perfect one, or anything where it's like, if you happen to have a very big skull or kind of like formed shoulder pads or anything like that, just start working on those bronze tones and get an understanding of how to work from dark to light with bronze paint, because it is very, very difficult to do that. So once you start understanding how those colors kind of work together and stuff, and experimenting around with different ideas, you'll know how it's going to look on Angron. So when you start painting the actual model, you already know what those techniques are going to be. You have your system built up already, you have your workflow, and you know what you're doing. You're not jumping into like looking at the model being like, oh my god, I don't know how to do this, and I've started to do it and I'm not happy. I can't stress enough how important experimentation is before you dive into a centerpiece model like Angron, because trust me, if you mess it up, you're going to be filled with regret and you're going to be so sickened that you didn't just take the time to practice. And I know it's really annoying to like waste hobby time by sitting down and saying, I have a Bloodthirster's arm here, I'm just going to work out how Angron's arm is going to look. I'm going to spend a couple of hours working on new techniques, but if you don't do it, you run the risk of messing up your like really lovely Angron model, and you're going to be pretty annoyed with yourself. So I can't stress that enough, because I've seen a lot of people saying, when Angron comes out, I'm going to try this new technique that I've never tried before. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people saying, I'm going to try OSL on Angron. Please, for the love of God, if you're going to try OSL for the first time, don't let Angron be your first model, because OSL is going to be complicated on Angron. The surfaces are not going to be forgiving for that kind of technique. Trust me. But if you're thinking about doing anything new that you haven't tried before, just practice it. And even if it is a system that you are used to, try and find bits and pieces in the same scale as Angron to like work on that level. Like I said, a lot of us are used to painting power armor, are used to painting 32mm or 25mm or 40mm models. This is a whole other type of project that you're going to need endurance, you're going to need new ideas, and you're going to kind of, you're working with a brand new canvas, the type of thing that you've not worked with before. So unless you're regularly painting Bloodthirsters or Bellicor or other things like that, this is going to be new and it's going to be scary. So go into it as prepped as you possibly can. So practice those bits, get out some random sprues, or just like get out some, paper or whatever. Work out your mixes beforehand as well. Like, that's so important. If you're going to be trying to work blending and stuff in, work out what the mix is that you're trying to go for. And while you're doing that, get a notebook or get a recipe book and dot those colored mixes in on the page right next to them, what it is, so that when you get around to Angron, you can just open that book and say, oh, okay, I'm using this much Khorne red, this much Rhinox hide, and that's what it's supposed to look like on the page. So on your palette, you can just recreate that straight away. You've got a reference. It's all about building up references, building up ideas, making sure you know and you have a system dialed in. So those are the key elements for prepping and getting ready for Angron. Let's wrap this video up with a nice little summary that's going to be cool. All right, everyone. That's about it for this video for preparation and kind of getting ready for Angron, the awesome demon Primarch who's coming to us in literally a matter of weeks at this point. We're all so hyped. We all want him in our hands and we all want to know what he's going to look like when he's painted. I'm really hyped to see what everyone else is going to come up with, because I know lots of people are going to try experimental and new things. I'm going to be going for the classic old Blanchitsu artwork kind of style thing for Angron, and I'm really looking forward to the challenge. But I know what I'm doing because I've already done a couple of practice models for Angron. I have my system dialed in, I've done my practice, have my reference images, I know what it's going to be. I'm going to sit down with that model and it's just going to be straight go, go, go. But let's just review everything that we've talked about today. So first things first, build up that reference bank, go online, look through your favorite artists, have a look at people who are painting Bloodthirsters, people who are painting big monstrous demons. Doesn't even have to be from 40k, it can be from whatever. Look online at cool art of Angron. Maybe some people have done cool things on Pinterest or DeviantArt or wherever. Have a look at those and, you know, save the pictures that you find interesting, the things that you want to recreate, whatever. Once you've got all that stuff down, you need to pick your tones, pick your paints. How are you going to try and execute this? Like, what's the best paints and the most important areas of the model? So we've identified those being the skin, the metallics, and the bone and leather, right? They're the main things that we're looking at here. So once you have all that down, it's practice. Right now we're in practice mode, people. Like every moment that you can get, start practicing how you're going to paint Angron. And I'm telling you, it's going to pay off so much when you actually sit down with that model and you say, oh cool, I'm really confident because I've done this thing already and I know exactly how it's supposed to look. I've already made the mistakes. I'm not going to make them with Angron. I know what I need to do. Once you have all that down, once you've got the practice in, Angron's going to look awesome and you're going to be so much happier with him than if you just launched into that project blind. And let me just say, like, you know, for a lot of people, it's going to be a daunting project, right? Like, but don't stress about it. Like I say, Angron is a deceptively simple model to paint. Of all the Primarchs, he is by far and away the easiest. I'm telling you, he's going to be so much easier than doing Mortarion or Magnus. And people are going to have a lot of fun with him. I think it's going to be surprisingly easy and satisfying to actually paint Angron. And a lot of people who might feel really freaked out by him at the beginning, as they're working through the project, will realize, actually, you know what? This guy's not too bad. But that said, I think all the things that we've talked about today are very important. So preparation is really going to be the key to success for Angron. We all want this centerpiece model to look fantastic. So with that in mind, if you have any questions or if you want to start a discussion about the whole thing, we have an awesome Discord, which is open to everyone to join in. Lots of great hobby channels in there as well to talk about Angron, talk about our ideas, get the conversation going, talk to people who maybe have some experience about painting similar models to him. So I, for one, am looking really forward to seeing what everyone else does with their Angron when they get him, and I'm really hyped to get him myself. So until then, folks, stay healthy, stay safe, kill main burn.